I think we wanted to develop it. I think we wanted to get more energy into it, more a darker feel too, and expand, if you like, the horizons of the musical world that we were living in. So things were beginning to work live, in one or two clubs around there, and I think Friars was a key one, and Angel Godalming, and then Newcastle, Glasgow. It was quite strange because, we seemed to get through in sort of southern Europe, and then tougher working class cities, and it was a sort of strange balance, and it was harder for us, in the sort of more cliquey, cultured world of London and some of the big cities.
Anthony Phillips left, and so we had to make the decision. I originally thought, as I said before, I think I saw him as group leader in many ways, certainly the most influential person in the group. And I thought when he left, we probably would split up, actually. And then we had a conversation. Mike and Pete were very keen to carry on, and Richard McPhail, who was our roadie but a good friend and a sort of a big fan and everything, said there's no way you must carry on. You've really got something going here. So all these things came together, and we had a meeting, and we decided that we probably felt we could do better on the drums. That we liked John and everything. He was good, but he wasn't. Just felt we could have someone more creative in the drum seat. So we had to make this decision, and so then we were just auditioning, for a guitarist and a drummer.
I stuck loads of ads in Melody Maker, which was the paper that was the most powerful at the time. Loads of bands were formed off the back pages of that. I think the odd Rolling Stone might have got a gig from that, or the odd member of Led Zeppelin. I think possibly the whole band like that. And it was 5 years of ads, and eventually this crazy guy called Peter Gabriel phoned me up, and I figured he was at least as mad as I was.
Well, I saw the name constantly in the back pages of Melody Maker, which always had the gigs that were on around town, around sort of, Greater London area, if you like. And they always seemed to be working. There was always them in Quintessence, I remember. And I remember complaining to my manager, or our manager, the band I was in, about, why are they working, we ain't, because we hardly worked at all. And really, I wasn't aware of their music at all, because we were actually playing all the time, but we weren't actually gigging. Until one day there was an advert, because I was kind of losing the plot with the band I was in. So I used to scour the back pages as well for jobs, and there was one box, advert with a box around, and Tony Stratton-Smith, who I knew very, very well. I had known him for years. And so I knew where to find him. I went to the Marquee Club bar and asked him if, Cut a long story short, he said it was for Genesis. And I thought, well, at last I'll get to find out, what the music's like.
We did quite a few auditions, and I think so. I took a big role in that as a sort of drum fanatic, and obviously without Anthony, who was the other drum fanatic, we put ads in, went through all sorts, and I remember Phil impressed me because I think he said he played on a George Harrison session, and I thought, that was very impressive, but I think he'd actually done sort of third tambourine. But anyway, we had a lot of people, including some, I think, really quite useful drummers. And we did it at my parents' house, which is where Tony and I used to do a lot of writing, and we did some rehearsing. Mainly the rehearsals at that time, I think, were between my parents' house and Anthony's family's house. I suggested, I think, that we devise a series of tests, because we didn't have long in an audition. I hate auditions anyway, but one of the problems with John is he was quite, once he got something, he could do it and deliver it well, but he was a very slow learner. So when we wanted to try different arrangements, different grooves, different feels. It was a painful and really time-consuming process. So we thought, okay, we'll throw some different tests at these drummers and see how quickly people pick up these ideas. Phil arrived early, as he often does. He was the most punctual member of the band always, but he was there with his mate Ronnie, and listening to the two other drummers, I think, run through these tests. So by the time he sat down, he knew it. As an ex-drummer, or still a part-time drummer, I knew just from the way he sat down in the saddle that he knew exactly what he was doing, just the way the body engages with the kit. It was clear that he could just lift the music. I think they always say a band is only as good as its drummer, and Phil is a great drummer.
The guitarist was more of a problem. In fact, we went out as a four-piece for about 2 or 3 months, I think, and which taught me a lot, because I ended up playing all this piano I put through a fuzz box, that I played all the guitar parts that Ant had played, well, all ones I could anyhow, on that, at the same time as playing the organ part. So I was doing this two-handed stuff, which I hadn't never sort of really done before, but it made me mature as a musician, great amount. And although it was probably never great, the four-piece thing, we did get it so it wasn't too bad. And we started writing this, we did this piece, which became the musical box, which we started as a four-piece. And it sounded, we knew this was really good. We used to play it on stage and stuff as a four-piece. It was good. We had a guitarist for very briefly, a guy called Mick Barnard, who came in for a month or two. And he was actually good, but he just probably wasn't assertive enough, And while that really wasn't working, we then, we auditioned Steve. Peter and I actually went to audition him because Mike was having trouble finding. He was always looking for someone to replace Ant, I think, which he was never going to be able to do because he was a good friend and everything. So we said, right, we'll find a guitarist. So we went and auditioned Steve, and we were really impressed with him. We really liked the way he approached things. It was just different. It wasn't entirely the same as us, but he played these things. His brother playing flute and him playing these things on guitar, which were quite slightly more classical style, perhaps, than we were used to. But we just thought he had a lot of imaginative ideas, and he didn't want to be a sort of mad guitarist. We weren't looking for... Most guitarists either wanted to be lead guitarists, sort of teeth, or else they were just purely acoustic guitarists, and weren't interested in either of those extremes. We wanted someone who could cover both ends. So Steve was a very important addition.
Away from me, cold-blooded woman, your thirst is not mine.
Well, what was great was that we were all a bit serious, and Phil was as drummers should be, was the joker. He brought this lightness to the band. I know you got a shock when we first started rehearsing at the Maltings, because suddenly, we had these huge rows, and Tony would stomp out, or I'd stomp out for 10 minutes, and he was a bit like, what's going on, And I remember he stayed in my house, my mum and dad, for the first sort of 10 days rehearsing for our first writing period. This is before Steve, but musical box time. And then after sort of 2 weeks, he went to stay with Pete. So he could get to know him a bit, And I think he always thought that actually I didn't like him. I'd kicked him out and sent him off. It wasn't that way at all. It was just like sort of sharing him, being around so you get to know him. So it must have been a funny time, the initial bit as a four-piece for Phil, but he just loved drumming and it was sounding good.
And the drummer's role has always been, really, the guy who sits there is a bit overweight, farts, drinks too much, cracks the odd joke, and deflates the tension, That's really what our role is.
It could go from a blazing row to someone sitting down playing the most exquisite, gentle music, and I just think, wow.
It's just extraordinary that we have got on so great, because at the beginning we were from totally different backgrounds. I was a grammar school boy, but I actually had just come from 2 or 3 years at drama school where anything went. I went out with all the girls, whereas they come from public school where there were no girls. And I kind of was very light-hearted and jokey and fully comfortable on a stage, if you like, even though I was behind the drums. And they kind of seemed quite, uptight. And again, part of that was because Anthony had left as well, and they didn't really know what was going to happen. You know, I mean, he was a quarter of the writing, team. You know, so. So you know, we'd be playing, and suddenly, I don't know, we'd stop playing, and something would happen, and then suddenly there'd be three of us, and because we didn't have Steve at that point, and I'd say, wait, what's happened to Mike? He's gone. You know, or Tony, you know, what's happened to Tony? He'll be back in a little while. A couple of hours later, Tony would come back, because something had been said by somebody, and I had noticed it, and very sort of a lot of tension. So, you know, eventually, I mean, it took a long time for that to be gotten used to, and also a long time for it to sort of disappear slightly.
Well, Phil and Steve's contribution, particularly at this stage, I think, was to bring a bit of musicianship into the group. I think, you know, Mike and I, well, I mean, I was still learning very much as a musician. I mean, I was, you know, it was okay, but nothing brilliant. And Mike was certainly still finding his way, I think, as a musician. Whereas Phil was he was a really high quality drummer right from the word go. He's got a great, brilliant sense of rhythm. And Steve, obviously, he was technically a better player than than we were at that time, I think. And that's what it really gave us, a bit of that sort of, you know, ability to sort of a bit of technique in there as well as everything else. Gave us a better chance to do things. I mean, for me, the contribution from Phil on the drums is what transforms it, really. And you particularly coming back to them and remixing them, just suddenly everything has a sort of lilt. It works in a way that it didn't. It was a bit stiff on Trespass, some of those things. And you listen on Nursery Crime, and even there's those sort of complicated songs like the Giant Hogweed, you know, they sort of have a much better flow about them, I think, for that reason. And Phil's other contribution, obviously, which we were aware right from the word go, was the fact that he could sing. The rest of us sort of made vague attempts at doing backing harmonies, which were okay. But with Phil, we actually had someone who had a really strong voice as well. So, and Phil and Pete used to do quite a lot of stuff singing in unison, as well as stuff in the harmony work. And Phil was also very good at just picking out little harmonies, you know, sort of a la sort of Crosby, Stills and Nash and things like that. Just little ideas would come to him like that. So they weren't contributing much as writers at this stage, either of them. But it was very much more as musicians, which in a way we were quite happy with, because we had quite enough material.
Phil definitely just lifted the foundation of everything, just with great grooves, and you know, so you know, I think everything could be done better in some ways, but and I think Steve, it was colouring. You know, he was a colouring agent in lots of ways. You know, and it was this sort of dark, contained personality that was struggling to get out. You know, I think that's partly why we connected with people, I think, was that there was this yearning, longing build-up of some compressed energy that needed to explode and get out. And we didn't always get it out, but people could feel and touch the sort of vibrations humming beneath the surface, and Steve definitely had a good dollop of unfulfilled frustrations, I think, that gave it a good personality.
I heard the old man tell his tale.
Writing Nursery Crime, we got together in Tony Stratton Smith's house and put all these and just started writing, really, and pooling ideas and things. And it was easier writing, say, than it was in Trespass, but it still wasn't that easy, I suppose.
We'd never really worked, well, they'd never really worked with us. You know, we tried writing stuff. We were doing loads of gigs at the time, and you know, the odd day spent in a windy church hall trying to write songs together just wasn't working, so we had to take time off. So we pulled out of gigs for the entire summer of 71. I seem to recall it was 3 months, which was unheard of in those days for them, you know, working band. But it was great because suddenly it was a chance to work with a band, you know, to a professional standard. I'd never really made an album like that. I'd done an album once before with a band called Quiet World, but that was very much sort of don't give up your day job, you know. And it was great working with everybody. We'd just bought a new Mellotron. And it was just fantastic, you know. I had a new Les Paul that I got courtesy of the band, a high watt stack. Lovely, you know. Felt very, very nice. And I practically never spent a night away from home. So suddenly I'm 3 months with these guys who are all talking the same sort of language. A kind of, it was almost as if the band had their own kind of way of communicating. I guess, you know, the fact they'd been at school for all those years. I mean, it was a little bit hard when I first joined. I didn't really understand what they were talking about. They had it was almost like the equivalent of Cockney rhyming slang. And Mike, for instance, and Tony, chord shapes on guitars, they would say, "Oh, that's a nice guy. That's nice." And I'd never heard that expression. They had their own world of Genesis even then.
It wasn't an easy writing session. I don't remember it being like that. But then, fair enough, you know, you got new people for the first time. But looking back, it's got a strong character.
I was much more of a player, you know, and you give me a bit of music and I'll play it, kind of thing. I wasn't really writing, apart from a few lines of Harold the Barrel, probably with Pete, and For Absent Friends. I mean, you know, it's difficult, you know, because it's one of these things where you never know what helped the bit. We were playing an awful lot together to write, a lot of jamming, as we've continued to do throughout the years. But I wasn't actually a bona fide writer.
I think it started with Ant, actually. Ant and I think. I'm sure it did, playing 12-string stuff together. And I had this Rickenbacker guitar. I tuned the strings. I started doing weird tunings. And this is a very bizarre tuning with all the top 3 strings tuned to F sharp, which is just mad. But it made that jangly sound. And it meant that big chord later on when you go bum bum, had this lovely open stringed feeling. And in fact, it's interesting because in a sense we were trying to work as a 4-piece and it wasn't really working. Tony doing all the lead parts on fuzz piano, you know. But actually, funnily enough, this song was the first time I felt that it actually did work as a 4-piece. The sound we made, I'm playing pedals at the end and Tony's playing keyboards, and it's funny, this song, I think, I mean, had we gone the 4-piece route, this song might have been where we might have gone. No, it didn't. But in a sense, this song worked well on stage as a 4-piece.
Play me my song.
The first thing I noticed was that no one was actually making the sound of a musical box, and I thought, God, you know, here's an opportunity for me. So I did this thing, recorded at half speed, which was a little guitar lick going. And so that was, you know, my chance to be the Sugar Plum Fairy, perhaps.
Mike started off with the first dring, ding, dring, 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 and you know, I was a big fan of The Who too, and I really wanted to try and persuade Mike to find something, you know, like a little Townsend arm-waving, you know, ballsy attacking section that we could add in there. And I think I was pushing very hard for that, and it was in the rooms in West Hampstead on the 28 bus route. And it was, I think, exciting when that sort of first came to gel as a piece. And I think my head at the time also was in this Victoriana world, which I pictured around the house my dad had grown up in. And so this sort of controlled English mental landscape under which festered, you know, violence and sex was the sort of flavor that I was trying to bring in to the lyrics and vocals.
And I want, and I feel, and I know, and I touch.
I think it created that sort of fantasy, the lyric relating, to all this sort of the old Victorian kind of quality it has, and the album cover, which related obviously to that as well. It was a very atmospheric piece. And it was musically interesting, and it went through all these changes and stuff. It was a sort of precursor, perhaps, of what was to come later. You have the little bits, and not a lack of repetition in the song. You can start off with one bit, which is a very strong section, that opening part, but it never comes back again, And we used to quite like doing that. We used to just like using a bit once and then going to a very loud bit and then a very quiet bit and another loud bit and then a sort of serene bit. By using the contrasts, I think it's a sort of song that has about a lot of contrasts in it, which, again, is for some people is very appealing. And some people just find it irritating because it means it never settles into a groove, it just sort of, you're doing one thing, this is great, it's stopped again, they're going off, time change and everything. But, so it is a very sort of typical Genesis song, sort of that. It followed on from Stagnation, I suppose, that same kind of thing, but perhaps a little bit more dramatic.
I never saw Family, the group Family, but there was a thing that they used to do called the Weaver, I think, which was a ding digga ding digga ding digga 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 ding, kind of a rolling thing, and I had a pretty good foot, so I could do ding digga ding, bum digga bum digga bum digga bum, and they kind of liked that, and so I put that with their rhythm, and suddenly we was like, well, hey, we're off,
You see, there we are, we're kind of going acoustic, but going more electric. It starts soft, and it builds and builds and builds. By the end, it's just everything's going. It's as big as any song we've ever done, really, I think. And I guess probably this must be the first time with the bass pedals. Because Trespass was a 5-piece, so you didn't need bass pedals, whereas we'd gone to that 4-piece scenario, with Tony playing the lead parts and me trying to play rhythm guitar parts, and bass pedals at the same time. So in a sense, it's funny how things happen. You get stretched and you're forced into doing something. I'm sure if we hadn't been a 4-piece, I'd never have bothered to pick up the bloody bass pedals.
The musical box obviously was, as I said, developed out of us playing as a 4-piece, and I think it also developed out of really right from the early days of the playing with Ant and Mike. And so it had that sort of 2-guitar thing, and I play guitar on it as well at the front, so the first part of it is all guitar, and a few ideas came out of that. But I think the real strength of the song comes towards the end, really. This little sort of a bit that starts, She's a Lady, and then the organ comes in playing this little sort of fugue type thing, which I originally saw as instrumental, I have to say. I thought, it's really good, and then we did it. And then Pete suddenly, we were doing the vocals, and I said, so he's finished now, and then suddenly he started singing on this bit, and I thought, shit, he's singing all over my bit. And I must admit, initially I wasn't too sure about doing that at all. And in fact, when we did the mix of the album, we mixed the voice too low. But on stage, when we started playing this, I realised just how strong that was, Because it was like what I played was still there, in a sense, but the vocal just gave it that real sort of capping quality, I think. And it was a real standout moment on stage, I think.
Well, this was one of the regular battlegrounds, because Tony would, blissfully unaware of an audience, want to stretch things out for 10 or 20 minutes for big keyboard and instrumental things. And I would be thinking, well, we're trying to tell a story here too. We need to re-plug in back with some vocals. So I think there were a lot of arguments about those type of issues, and probably more in latter days too, in sort of Suppers Ready and like Apocalypse and 9/8 and some of the Lamb, because I just felt some of the keyboard solos were just going to were too long and going to lose people. So, and it was an important part, because once you didn't want all the up moments to be instrumental only and all the down moments to be the vocal bits. I certainly didn't.
Sunday at 6 when they closed both the gates, a widowed pair.
The first thing I ever sort of wrote in my own right for Genesis was For Absent Friends, and I think I was too shy to present it to the lead singer. I think, oh, Pete, do you fancy doing this? Because, Pete was very much the star, very open, friendly, approachable, etc. But at the same time, I think maybe the fact that we were the two new boys, Phil and I, we sort of wrote that thing together. We wrote the lyrics together. I came up with the music for it, and it was a pleasant little ditty. The thing is, a lot of people didn't realise that was Phil, because Phil and Pete did have very similar voices. In fact, I remember seeing them live before I joined the band, and I thought there was some sort of automatic double tracking effect going on with Pete's voice, and then as I looked a little closer, I could see that, Pete and Phil were in perfect sync with similar sort of vocal tones.
Steve and I did write this song because we were the two new boys that kind of felt, well, why don't we sort of see what we can do? And the fact that it was on the album, I guess, was because it was very different from anything else, and I think we were quite happy to have that variety.
Any formation of the band has always been like anyone that could do something, could bring something to the table, singing, playing flute. We encourage it, you know what I mean? Whatever you've got, you use, I think Pete enjoyed having Phil singing.
It's not my favourite moment, I have to say, but his voice sounds very nice, very pure. He sort of has more of a sort of James Taylor sort of quality in those days, right, before he got this great big, the rasp that was to come later. But it showed that he had it. I think because he had a nice voice, we thought it would be great to sort of feature it as a solo thing, and that was it, and Pete was quite happy with that, Just showed another side to the group, I think, a little bit, really. But as I said, it was more in the contributions, really, where he's singing, with Peter. I think that it's more of a, on Harold the Bower, for example, where they sing the whole thing as a duet, sing it together. In fact, they're actually mixed on the tape. You can't separate them. We thought it might be nice to sort of, because sometimes it sounds a little Phil biased, I think, that song.
I'm standing in a doorway on the main square, catching this mountain.
What happens is that my voice, as you can hear now, has got quite a lot of bass content in it, low content. And the lower, Phil's, on the other hand, is much sort of higher element, his sort of center of gravity, if you like, harmonically. So if you put the two at exactly the same level, you'll read more of his voice than mine. And even though Harold the Barrel, was all my song, that I think, you do hear just as much of Phil, if not more, in some places. I think when I left and that voice continued, that was easier for people to get used to, and he's a very natural singer, so I think it should have occurred to the others earlier on than it did, I think, to try Phil.
Harold the Barrel was a good, fun song. It showed the kind of the humour that we would later, well, has always actually been in Genesis. People tend to take us very seriously, but we don't. So that was a good thing. Phantom of the Sound Masters was a huge stage song.
I had this piece that I'd written when I was at university, which is just this little organ part, really. It was quite a simple little rundown. And I started developing it once. We decided to buy a mellotron, that was it, because we really wanted, we loved the sound, and we had used a little bit on Trespass, and we loved the first Crimson album, which had used it obviously very extensively. So we went and bought one of the ones off King Crimson, actually. And I sort of, this little riff I'd started off at in university. I then tried it was using the mellotron and the organ, and it really developed these great big swells on this thing, and it sounded fantastic. And so that was Phantom of Sound Masters, and it was that we then developed from that sort of opening part into a complete song out of that, which was a lot of jamming from the rest of the group and everything. But it produced a very, I think, a sort of strongly romantic thing, a lyric, obviously, sort of based on the myth of Sound Masters.
Conquest, he found himself within a glade he'd not beheld before. Where are you, my father?
What I liked about that was the band had the kind of grand sweep of an orchestra on it. It was using the mellotron to the full. And I remember one night we were working on the song. It was about midnight, and we'd all had a meal. Normally we didn't do that. We tended to sort of down tools, and once the sun had gone down, that was usually it. But for some reason we were all up for it, and we were rehearsing in this place in Crowborough, Tony Stratton Smith's cottage there, in a place we nicknamed Toad Hall. And it was midnight, and we were doing what became the end of that song, and I think we were all fairly relaxed after a few, drinks. And right at the end, it just seemed like a perfect moment to do a guitar solo over it. I steamed in with that, and I felt that there were no bands really around that were doing anything quite like that. A sort of fairly classical chord sequence and a rock guitar solo over the front that's maybe got a little bit more to do with the violin in spirit than the guitar. I'd come up with this idea of this guitar technique which was tapping. It was a 71, and it meant that you could play like a keyboard player by using the fretboard like a keyboard. Tapping's on Hogweed. It's on the front of Hogweed, and tapping's also on the musical box. So. It's on both tracks, and also Tony and I used to twin these things together. So the intro of the Return of the Giant Hogweed was the two of us doing those parts in harmonies, triplets in harmonies.
Turn and run, nothing could stop them. All around every river and canal, their power is growing.
Your taste changes over the years with all sorts of things, and but there was a mood which Paul nailed, I think, which although an external scene because of the croquet game and again the sort of suppressed violence was, I think, accurate for the vibe that we were trying to portray at the time.
It's certainly weird. It's as crazy as any wallpaper that was around at the time, but you've got to remember that the 60s had just passed, only just, so I think it very much reflects its time.
I almost prefer this cover coming back to it than I did at the time, in a funny way, looking at it. It's difficult for me to see. It's so much part of my past and youth, and I've signed so many copies of these things that you sort of see them all the time now, so it's rather difficult to have an objective viewpoint. But I think it's a strong image, and with the sort of the lawn stripes and everything, it gives a very strong feeling, and it fits well with the idea of the title and that association with the musical box.
I remember at the time Paul Whitehead coming in with the idea, and obviously he had worked with Peter on a couple of ideas on the phone, I would imagine. It was before the days of email, so if you wanted to see something, you had to actually get together in a room and look at it, and the thing with the croquet with the heads, that was all it's kind of off the wall. I mean, fortunately, it wasn't as romantic and feminine as Trespass, which was good because it showed that there was a little bit of an unusual side, not just a wistful side to the band. Because I think for Trespass, the music and the cover looked a bit wistful, even though there's a knife on it. But it doesn't feel quite as butch as Nursery Crime.
The flame still summer lingers on, though the picture soon shall.
Well, Nursery Crime obviously was the album that incorporated Phil and Steve into the band, and I think that we became, for that reason, perhaps a better playing unit than we've been in the past, really. And we'd also, by this time, played quite a lot on stage, and so I think the development from Trespass was quite a big one. And we had the ability, the mellotron was a new instrument in that album and everything, and so a sort of certain quality of what people came to think of that early Genesis sound was very much, I think, started with this album, probably more than with the previous one.
I was thrilled with it, I mean, the rough edges at that time I refused to hear. I just wanted to sort of bask in the glory of the fact that, I'd done an album with what was destined to become a great band, and occasionally the sound was wonderful.
It was a real great 5-piece working unit. You know, I mean, we all got together for the meetings with the cover. You know, we all got together. We were there all the time for the mixing. Pretty much, we were all involved in the writing, apart from the lyrics. You know, certain songs would have pairs going off to write lyrics. But no, it's the period, especially. I have very fond memories of the period.
A step into the shade, if you like. There's more sort of sun shining in Trespass, more sort of folky fields and outside stuff, and we've gone indoors, a nursery crime.
I think it's a good example of how we were moving on. It's got some nice stuff and some okay stuff, I think, Nursery Crime. Thought the cover was good. I like the cover. Actually, quite a strong image of the little girl on the croquet lawn and the head, I think. And we were starting to create an atmosphere about the band. You know what I mean? Quite as perception, quite slightly quirky. People seeing this artwork, hearing the songs, Pete's performance. I felt we're starting to sort of become something that was a little unique in the music business in England, and that was a good thing, I think.